Good afternoon. Welcome to ED&A. I'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 74 and call Mr. Bossi for Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I know Senator Pearl enjoyed hosting you for much of the morning over in Senate ED&A. And then he still has an afternoon session to get through, so he sent me to pinch hit. My name is Grant Bossi, Deputy Chief Staff of the New Hampshire Senate, here to introduce Senate Bill 74 on behalf of Senator Pearl, the prime sponsor. This bill would provide the legislature with more detailed information about the permitting process in our state agencies, primarily, but not exclusively, the Department of Environmental Services. The complexity, cost, and length of obtaining state permits is a long-held complaint of property owners. While not dictating outcomes, this would require our state agencies to supply legislative leaders, such as the chair of House and Senate ED&A, with the number of permit applications granted and denied, the number of permits pending, and the number that took longer than 90 days. There is a fiscal note, as DES claims it would need more new staff to track and report on its permitting activity. DOT says its software can't track how many permits have been pending for longer than 90 days. Senator Pearl believes this is information our agency should have already been tracking within their current budgets. Senator Pearl brought in a floor amendment that pushed the first report to February of next year since, well, we're already past February of this year, and the Senate approved the bill on a voice vote. If you have any questions, I will make sure that Senator Pearl gets you an answer. Senator Pearl thanks you for your consideration and support for Senate Bill 74. Thank you very much.
Okay. Do I understand your comments on the fiscal note correctly in that you think they should be doing this already and therefore it's probably not new effort?
Yes, Senator believes this is part of what our agency should be tracking their own activities, and they should be able to share that information. And while there may be some cost to the agency, he doesn't believe it would require a new appropriation.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have a question? Excellent job, thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you later.
All right. Brian Gould? Oh, perfect. There you are. Now you're on.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Gould. I'm a lawyer here in Concord. Practiced in New Hampshire for 35 years. And I do primarily commercial litigation and environmental permitting work. I did do some work with Senator Pearl on this bill, which is why I'm here, is to give you a little bit of background on how we got to this point. So the baseline rule in New Hampshire, and forgive me if you're already familiar with this, but under the Administrative Procedure Act, 541A, 29, and 29A, the state agencies have 30 days after an application is received to determine whether that application is complete, and then has 60 days after finding that the application is complete to rule on the application. So that's sort of the baseline rule. If the agency does not make a decision within 60 days of completeness, the application is deemed approved under the Administrative Procedure Act. Everything else that in state law that varies from that is a deviation from the general rule that this body enacted probably 10, 15 years ago now. Now, the reason that this comes up now is because over the years, state agencies have come before the legislature with varying requests for extensions of time to make permitting decisions. And those requests have been all over the place in terms of the length of time. And it's important in determining whether regulation is appropriate and time limits are appropriate. It's important to try to balance the need for the regulation against the effect that it has on developers, individuals who are working on projects, because these permitting programs cut across, big business, small business, and individuals. So for example, the Department of Transportation has a driveway permitting program. And I personally have had experience recently where it took DOT over 3 years between the time the application was filed, after multiple determinations that it was incomplete, and then just an extended period of time before there was a decision. And that's not unusual for DOT driveway permitting. And the reason is because DOT is exempt from any time limits, including the time limit in the Administrative Procedure Act. Another agency that's affected by this is, of course, DES. And just for example, last year, the Air Resources Division came before the legislature and said, we want to extend the period for our decisions to 120 days from the day that the application is deemed complete. As part of the negotiation over that extension, the Air Resources Division agreed to report to the legislature on how long it was taking for these decisions to be made. So if you look at RSA 125C 12, Roman 2 and Roman 2A, you're going to see that was a change that was made last year. That reporting requirement in paragraph 2A is what gave rise to this legislation this year. If the Air Resources Division should be reporting on this, all state agencies that are regulating the use of property should be reporting to the legislature on this, because the legislature, in my view, should not be making decisions on how long a permit can be pending without a decision without knowing how long they're taking now. So without that information, you're being told on an anecdotal basis from perhaps a constituent or a business or an organization, I had this problem over here, but you don't have the comprehensive information that you need to determine if there needs to be a change in the permitting timelines. There's an expression in the business world that time kills all deals. You may have heard it. It's true. I can tell you from representing a number of businesses over the years on transactions that the longer things go, the more things that can go wrong, and the more likely that a project will fail. So it is important for economic activity that there be predictability. Under the solid waste statute, RSA 149M, DES has 180 days from the time that the application is complete until it makes a decision, unless it holds no public hearing, in which case it's 120 days. Under the wetlands statute, it's very confusing. There's a completeness determination within 10 days. This is RSA 482A 3 Roman 14. You can have a series of incompleteness determinations. And then once it's complete, DES has 50 days to ask for additional information. Once it gets that additional information, it has 30 days if it's a certain, if it's an impact of an acre or less, and 50 days if it's over an acre or more. The point is that there are widely varying standards here, and none of it, and I've been doing this a long time in the state, and I've watched these extensions be granted in the legislature. I've never seen any agency come in and say, here's what we're doing in terms of permitting, and here's why we need the extension. And so I think that this bill, what it seeks to accomplish is to give you that information so you can determine whether the extensions that are in place of the base, the default timeline in the Administrative Procedure Act are warranted, or whether they should be, or whether new extensions should be granted or not.
Thank you. That's fascinating. So, do you happen to know if the Air Resources Council has actually reported on its,
As I was preparing today, Representative, I wondered that very thing. I don't know whether it has or not. It was supposed to have by February of this year, and I don't know if it has.
all right, we will, I'll take an action to go look at that. And does anyone else have any questions? Representative Pearson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand we live in an age where everybody wants to collect data. And one of the things that is starting to get old is collecting data for the sake of collecting data, right? Because if you're not going to if there's no actionable event with the data that you're collecting, why are you doing it?
True.
So what is the actionable event that you would foresee coming from the collection of this data to this body?
I think you would have a much better understanding of what takes place during a permitting process, and you would be able to make a judgment as to whether the length of time that state agencies are taking to make these decisions is justifiable under the circumstances. The only way you're going to know that is to find out when these applications are being filed, how long it's taking to determine that they're complete, how much back and forth there is between the agency and the applicant before that happens, then how long are they taking to make a decision, how many times is the agency going to the applicant and saying, well, we know we have 180 days, for example, but we need another 40 days. Very few applicants are going to say, well, no, I'm not going to give you that, because if they do, they know the decision they're going to get. So I think it's important. You can just look at the statute and you can say, okay, well, we've covered this off. We've got 180 days in there and that's reasonable. Well, it might be for a big project, but it might not be for a small project. But until you have this kind of information, you can't make the judgment whether state regulation is disproportionate to the need. So that's where I see this going.
Follow up?
Okay, so the action then that you're foreseeing here is modification of the timeframes to which permits go automatically approved. Is that because
That's
if
where it
I'm
could-
understanding the explanation of the expiration of a duration of time?
Right. Or you may say, if we're giving you 100, just as an example, I'm not recommending this at this point, but if you were to say, we've given you 180 days, but we've also added in here that that you can go to the applicant and ask the applicant for an extension. Is that appropriate, given that you've already given the agency 6 months to make a decision? Or would you simply tell the agency, you've got 6 months and that's it? Another example is under the wetlands statute. There's a provision that says that if DES concludes that it basically has insufficient resources, it can suspend all of the timelines for wetlands permitting. Do you want that in place, given that you've already structured you've created a structure for how long these decisions are going to make? Are you willing to allow the agency to make that unilateral decision and potentially suspend, hundreds of applications because they've made a unilateral determination that they don't have the resources to complete it? So I just think this is an important first step for the legislature to understand what's really going on out there. And that information, to me, is valuable so that you can start to intervene in an effective way in ensuring that the regulatory process not only protects the interests that regulation is designed to protect, and those are important factors here, but also that property rights are not being unfairly burdened and that economic activity is not being undermined because of the degree of regulation and the slowness with which regulatory authorities move.
Thank you. Representative Sellers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would think, as you agreed, that this data should already be available at this point. And to me, even as a legislator, it would be nice to know on occasion, right? It might not be all the time, but on occasion, wouldn't it be nice to know to say, oh, we're doing so many applications a year and the average time is taking this. And then we can look at that against what other states are doing the same thing and see if we're in range or out of range and make adjustments. Would that be correct?
I think that is correct, and I think, all of you sitting, I know that I pay close attention to this stuff, and I don't know how many applications and how long it's taking. I assume that most of you don't know, and I assume most of you would like to know how long it's taking, so you know whether your statutes are effective in protecting the other side of the equation. There's plenty of emphasis on regulation. But what about property rights? What about economic activity? Is that being adequately protected? And you're right, you need that information to make that determination, I think.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mitch Bryce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nate Grays for the Business and Industry Association, the Statewide Chamber of Commerce. We support this legislation. We have been very supportive of the governor's efforts to decrease permitting timelines, but we recognize that in order to do that, we actually need to know what actual timelines are taking place now. As I believe that Attorney Gould has explained in detail today, we don't actually know that at this point in time. We have the statutory framework, and we've certainly heard anecdotally, especially as we've looked at the areas that our members play a part of, which frankly are a significant portion of the state's regulatory framework. And they say that oftentimes it's the case the agencies come back, they ask for extensions. And so those statutory timelines aren't necessarily what state agencies are actually following. We do know that asking on kind of an individual basis, some state departments are able to provide some information, but having it in a more comprehensive manner will allow the legislature to look at it and say, are these appropriate timelines? What can we do to change those if necessary, especially as we're seeing factors for example, housing and housing shortage is a big issue. It's something that I know the legislature's taken a look at several times, especially on the permitting side of things. And of course, what that means is we need to know how many permits are out there, how they're being processed. Are they being processed adequately? Are applicants providing adequate information? The agencies need different information, what's going on there, and we just don't know that at this point in time. So this legislation will help shore that up and provide us a stepping stone to the next step, whatever that may be, which may vary depending on what specifically we're talking about. Happy to take questions.
Okay. Representative Sytek.
Would you spell Grays, please?
Yes, last name is Greyes. First name is Natch. Thank you.
Wait a minute. First
Thank
name?
you. That was imaginative.
Yes,
I'm sorry, that first name?
Natch. And I apologize for my handwriting. I can give you a business card afterwards if it would be easier.
Not what I thought. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for not being upset when we mangled your name. Okay. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. See that nobody else wants to testify on House Bill 74. So I'll close the hearing. Oh, thank you. It's going to take a while to get up to speed. All right, and
I mean, do we want to talk about this one and see?
yeah, might as well talk about it. Unless someone's got a motion already. I just glanced at the DES website, and if they are publishing their air permits, they're certainly not making a big deal out of it. I can't find it on a quick search. Anyone else have a comment, concern? Representative Pearson?
Just in reference to the question that I asked the attorney, right? We're collecting data. We're going to do something with that data, I hope, one way or the other. But I mean, at this point, this is not really, it doesn't seem to be doing anything other than saying you must collect data. I mean, that's, unless I'm missing something in here, that's what I'm getting out of this. So I don't think that's unreasonable to throw a timestamp on something. But I don't, if there's a downside here, I'm missing it.
Okay. And then Lamb, and then Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that this actually makes a lot of sense to do this because we don't necessarily understand how many properties are being impacted by these regulations and any of the rules that are a part of this. And just making sure that dealing with these agencies is a knowable process for property owners, I think is a very good thing and be very helpful. So I'm in favor of this, and I think it would be beneficial.
Representative Howard?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. To answer Representative Pearson's question, I think that Mr. Grays from the BIA did a great job of kind of explaining that the governor has been trying to streamline the permitting process, and I do think that that's something that we can all agree needs to be done, and it's the information that this bill provides is what we actually need to make sure that we do it the right way. Thank you.
Anybody else? I think I agree with the first speaker that they should be tracking this data already. But, okay, so does someone have a motion in that case, since we all seem happy?
Yes, I'd be happy to move ought to pass on Senate Bill 74.
I'll second.
All right. We do have a quorum. We should speak more on it, or?
Yes, I'll speak briefly on it. I think that it's important for us to know the impact of what we do in law and to make sure that, especially if we're giving any exemptions or longer time periods, that we understand how that'll impact people. So I think that this is a good bill, and I do believe that this should already be tracked by the department so that they know how they're following through with the existing law. So while this is an early bill and it'll go over to finance, hopefully they'll find that this is something that is already part of their duties and has no extra cost.
Probably Representative Pearson?
Again, like I said, you can't make you shouldn't be making policy decisions that affect the various, not only agency groups, but the citizens without data. So otherwise you're just guessing. And unless we have that data, I just see this as an efficiency thing. So that's where I'm at with that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Representative Sytek?
Yeah, I'd like to move, if the clerk reads the calendar better. I'm prepared for a lot of other bills. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? Okay, the motion is ought to pass, and the clerk call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon?
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson?
Yes.
Representative Bailey?
Aye.
Representative Sheehan?
Yes.
Representative Stellers?
Yes.
Representative Slushy?
Yes.
Representative Groden?
I wasn't here for the question.
You were here for the,
Yeah, you were here when the question was put.
called.
Yes.
Representative Davis?
Yes.
Representative Dargy?
Yes.
Representative Howard?
Yes.
Representative Long?
Yes.
And the chair.
Yes.
14-0, I guess.
Yeah, we're missing,
I'll move consent.
what's that?
I'll move consent.
Okay,
There's 13, I believe.
we're missing at least 3
10,
people,
12,
so.
Oh, yes, 13, sorry, 13. There's 3.
Yes, Representative Reeves isn't
Yeah,
here,
there-
Representative
there-
Schmidt's not here, and Representative Tebow's not here, so,
13-0.
okay. Then, does anyone object to consent? No, all right, we'll put this on consent and forward it over to finance to get a strict combing through on that fiscal note, because I don't really believe it.
Go get the green sheet since we have 5 minutes.
Senator Waters, yep.
You already have one.
The duplicate, I can talk
You're way
twice
ahead.
or twice as fast.
Twice as fast, please.
There are
Wait a
many
minute,
different
this is for another committee.
Whoops. Oh, that's next week.
Well, it's glad to see you're prepared, Senator.
More than one of us. screw
All
up.
right, we'll have a few minutes before we open the next hearing.
Getting worrisome.
All right,
Can make it official.
all right.
I'm monitoring the Senate. Deal behind you. And they are.
What are they on now?
They're on 142.
Gold Star Brothers?
Yep, and then they gotta go to 780 and then 230. So.
What time are they supposed to be?
They're supposed to be doing their final bill in 3 minutes. So they're back now.
They started at 10 minutes a bill and went through about 6 of them very quickly. And then we got to the Flag Commission with the show and tell,
Oh, this morning?
and it went downhill a bit.
Oh, mercy.
But they passed several of our bills on consent.
Yeah, their committee operating rules are a little different than ours. So they will not go out of order, which is annoying sometimes, but I don't see why they don't.
Won't go out of order, meaning like
So like,
order
if you had,
that they
if you
receive
had a
the bills
conflict,
in?
well, because like, for instance, for us, right, if we did 10-minute bills, as long, you could be late, you just can't be early, right? So you could open and recess a hearing to deal with something in the room, and pick something up after. But apparently in the Senate, they have to go in order, regardless of how late they are with things, or, that's what I was told by a chair in the Senate. I don't know. I found that to be strange, because we certainly don't, we're not bound by that, but Senate has different rules for all kinds of stuff, so.
Yes.
Their consent rules are better.
What's their consent rule?
The consent rules is if the minority opinion is not gonna floor fight something, it doesn't matter what the vote is, it can go on consent. If they're not gonna put up a floor fight, why bother, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at the number of people, the most they would have would be 2 against, and we can put it on consent with 3.
So, I mean, that's a new rule they adopted this year.
Alright.
in the Senate.
So anything that's willing to go to a floor fight, willing to go to a voice vote, they can put it on consent. All right, have a seat. I'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 196, and I call the sponsor, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 196. This bill was a request from Major General Michaelides from the Military Affairs and Veterans Services Department. And what it does is for this department and the other two that handle in-house projects, to increase the amount of projects that they can handle in-house from $500,000 to $1 million. This was presented as basically an inflationary adjustment because it had been a long time since this was done. And the projects that used to cost $500,000, guess what? Now costs around $1 million. And for these smaller projects then, these three departments do have their in-house staff, which handles it. I had thought that Charlie Arlinghouse might be here, as he was in the Senate hearing, to explain the fact that yes, indeed, these departments do have that capacity, and that is what they do. The reason I was kind of waiting to see if the Major General was coming, because he is supposed to be here, I believe in the Senate we had meant, and I had an amendment prepared to strike lines 12 through 16 because the Major General felt that they did not need 2 new positions. The in-house staff that they had and the other departments are already doing the work. They don't need new staff to do that. I have a copy of that amendment, which I will give to you. I think it was just inadvertent that we didn't get to it in the Senate, but Madam Chair, if that is still the wishes of the Major General, which he had expressed at the time was in the Senate, what we would do is strike lines 12 through 18. And I do have,
I would certainly feel better if the major were here to confirm for
yeah,
himself
yeah, so
that he doesn't.
I've asked my aide to call to see if he's on his way, and I hope I'll have some answer, or that he or his assistant will show up. So I'd be glad to take any
meanwhile,
questions,
we
though.
might have
'cause-
some questions.
yeah.
Representative Pearson.
I have a
you're
question
interviewed.
just on what this, because if we're talking about the elimination of 2 positions and you flip over to the fiscal note, it says the bill does not provide funding nor authorize new positions.
That's correct.
So that doesn't seem to match
Yes.
the paragraph to which the senator would like removed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of peculiar that made it
Yeah.
through LBA with.
Thanks for your question.
But you know
And
what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Again, I think what happened was that after I submitted the original draft, that, of course, who was asked to do the fiscal note? The Department of Military Affairs, right? And I think at that point, they were saying, no, we don't need those positions. I mean, they're not eliminating positions. It's not that they would not be asking for 2 extra. They have people to do this work. And so I think that what may have happened is that's
According to the fiscal note, it was administrative services that said military affairs needs more people.
yeah. So, again, in the hearing, both Charlie Arlinghouse and the Major General said we're all set. But anyways, I'm sorry, again, my apologies, Madam Chair. I will try to follow up on this to get some clarity on it. The substance of the bill, though, is just that rather, inflationary change to go from 500,000 to $1 million. This rest of this, I hope, can get resolved for you. But
Yes, we'd
again, my
like to- we
apologies
would
for
like
it.
to know.
It
Thank
won't be the first time that a senator has messed up. Okay.
One never knows. Representative Dargy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the fiscal note relative to the revenue, there's a decrease noted for Division of Public Works Design and Construction. Is that an offset to a decrease in expenditures somewhere else within the state budget? So it's really just where the expense shows up?
Yes,
that
thanks for your
correct?
question. I think that what that calculation was just that I think they did there's like 12 projects a year was an average, and that if that other department was no longer doing the 500,000 to $1 million size projects, that's what they would have received as revenue from the projects for that work, but now it's going to be done in-house. So I think
But-
that's,
So they're not getting, yes.
But
good for
net to
you.
the state, it's really not being spent. Someone's doing the work. The revenue is a revenue here and an expense
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah. It just-
they net out.
yeah, it's just
Okay.
parsed out as to where the work's taking place
Okay.
for projects that are under $1 million.
Thank
And Madam Chair, I've been told that the Major General Michaelides' assistant was parking her car and she's on the way up.
Okay, thank you. We will take a breath while the, yeah, we got till 2 o'clock. So we will take a short recess while, until
you,
that
Ann.
person gets here, and I certainly want to find out about it. All right, this is Nicole DeSalet's Buckler? Boucle?
Yes, sir. Yes. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Nicole Desolé Bixler. I'm the Deputy Adjutant General for the Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services. Thank you.
Excellent. We're hoping you will explain that you don't need any more people in order to manage these
Yes,
projects.
ma'am, that's true. We do not.
Are there any other questions from the committee? For my own curiosity, what kind of projects are we talking about?
Ma'am, well, mostly we are talking about renovation type projects, like, for instance, the best example is probably roofs and boilers that we're finding to keep up with the increase in prices and inflation, that we're finding that these smaller projects are falling between the 500,000 and $1 million. So we fully would love the help of DPW to help us with the larger projects, but these smaller projects can be done in-house. We do have a registered architect, Ken Coombs, and he can do a great job with these smaller projects. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm very relieved. Anyone else have a comment, question? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
And there's nobody else here who cares. So I will close the hearing. Yes, it is. Does someone have a motion on this?
I'm requesting an amendment to be drafted
Ah.
because we can't do a Senate amendment.
Yes, Representative Leon is getting a Senate amendment turned into a House amendment to delete that contingency, because that will raise questions all along the line. And so we will not be able to vote on this until it's ready. And we have 20 minutes until our next hearing at 2 p.m.
For just a moment. Oh, sorry.
Okay, it being 2 o'clock, I'm opening the hearing on Senate Bill 193, and I call Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Victoria Sullivan. I represent Senate District 18, which is Manchester Wards 5 through 9, and the town of Litchfield. And this morning, it's been a long one. This afternoon, I introduced Senate Bill 193 FN. I do have an amendment that I would need someone from the committee to bring forward that I worked out with Health and Human Services that I'll present to you after. But basically, this bill is, you've heard of Doge, we've got COGE. Well, this is actually delving more into where the governor's COGE is an upper level for agencies. This is actually talking about programs and projects that we have going on. Having worked through grants in the past, I can tell you that sometimes the taxpayer money is not used as they would like it to be, and that's not on the departments. That's really comes from the strings that are attached from the federal government. In Manchester, we have been trying to find out what Title I monies cost us for a decade. John Avard, who sat on our school board, kept asking, what does Title I cost us to use? If we're getting $2 million for Title I, does it cost us $2.2 million to actually implement it with all the strings attached? And what are the outcomes on that? And we can't find the answers to these questions. Again, having worked on a grant, I think people might be surprised to find out that often if you don't use all of the funds, you're fined. So at the end of the grant, people are spending money, departments are spending money on things that they have to get rid of the money when, it's not the best use of public dollars. So otherwise, you get actually penalized for not using that money. So I think that these are conversations that are important. This actually, the amendment that I have that I worked out with HHS is really takes some of the reporting that they currently do and allows them to just submit that instead of taking extra steps or duplicative steps. And that really follows what's in Chapter 9 for the budget appropriations and revolving funds. So we've put in an amendment that says that they can submit that instead. The commission itself will look at what the agencies submit, and then they will choose up to 5 programs a year. So this isn't that they're delving into every single thing that's happening in the state. That would be an impossible task for people. But we're hoping that they will be able to pull out some of the most, the bigger projects or things that might raise a red flag to them to delve into it and do an evaluation on it and see how we can better access those funds and help the agencies if they have a need that's not being met and communicate back, hopefully, with the federal government to tell them what we actually need for our state. So that's the intention of it. I think it's going to be a positive move for our state. I think it will reveal some things that maybe our taxpayers don't know about that happens in sort of the sausage making when we have grants or different programs that are funded through the state. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking at the fiscal notes and it doesn't look like it's helpful at all. Do you have any idea what it might cost?
The fiscal notes have been an issue this whole session. I think you guys are probably dealing with the same issues that we are. So I don't, like I said, the people serving on the commission are volunteers. So it'll be a volunteer commission. And I think with the amendment that we have, it shouldn't be a heavy lift for the agencies either because they're already submitting that information.
Representative Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this forward and being here today. My question is why you're looking to create a commission of business leaders in order to do this, as opposed to looking at it somewhere within the legislature, perhaps reporting to finance and the associated committee chairs. Thank you. And I did speak with HHS, and they did suggest that perhaps we could do a, may include some of the department heads. But I really think having business leaders that are not ingrained in what happens here on a day-to-day and have a fresh look at it, I think that they will see things that they wouldn't allow in their businesses to make things more efficient. When you're in government, doing government things, you get used to doing it the government way. And sometimes it's a nice approach to have a fresh set of eyes on something.
Follow-up.
And then the follow-up is, I guess, my confidence. I'm curious about your confidence level that there'll be 20 business leaders who are willing to do this on an ongoing basis.
It says no more than.
Okay.
So, we know how it is with commissions, but I thought that gave enough room for flexibility and to get if you're looking at something with education per se, you might have a lot of people that want to come to the table. And if you've got something that's more narrow, you don't have to have as many. So I thought it left some flexibility for people to be on that committee. And the committee can bring forward anyone that they want to talk to, any people that are knowledgeable in the areas to bring into to have conversations with. So I wanted to give the committee enough room to actually have some flexibility in what they're doing, but anything more than 20, you're not going to get a lot done, right?
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. I'm going to leave this amendment here. Do you want me to give it up to you?
But yes, please, we'll pass it around. Meredith Tellis and Francesca Hennessy.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and thank you for having us. My name is Meredith Tellus. I'm the Director of the Division of Program Quality and Integrity for the Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm joined by Francesca Hennessy. I'll let her introduce herself.
Good afternoon. My name is Francesca Hennessy. I'm the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Administrator within Program Integrity. So some of my units are the Special Investigations Unit that investigates fraud, and Provider Integrity, which also investigates Medicaid provider fraud.
So when I first looked at this bill, what struck me was the similarity to some of the language within the budget RSA, which is RSA 9.4. And it very closely aligns with a lot of what agencies are already doing within RSA 9.4, which is when I struck up a conversation with John Williams, our legislative liaison, to be able to discuss that a little bit further. John, I think, has passed out an example of what exists in the agency phase of the budget. And during the agency phase of the budget, we submit forms that are developed by our Department of Administrative Services that include agency mission statements, goals and objectives, and performance metrics. And we fill out the baseline performance metric and then the targets for the performance metric. And we do that every 2 years in like August or September of the even numbered years. Those are all available online, and they're developed in order for the governor and the finance committees for reference when they are developing the budgets for the state, so that they have that available to them as they're building their budgets. So in seeing the overlap, I kind of thought, while this legislation is clearly very well intended, has a lot of good elements, my concern was not wanting to have duplicative efforts where we would be filling in really similar information in two different places. That just wouldn't be an efficient use of time. Hence the concept behind the amendment that Senator Sullivan has just provided, that we would be able to utilize the information in the agency budget instead of kind of recreating it in some other template, is the idea behind that. I think that to do what's envisioned in the bill without that amendment enacted would require a lot of resources, depending upon how you define program. And the program that's in the legislation, the definition in the legislation is pretty high level, so it could be defined different ways. I assume that the commission would come up with a definition, but the way we define it within HHS is at a pretty low level. So I just wanted Francesca to have the opportunity to describe a couple of the programs that work under her and kind of what resources she thinks it would take to do this kind of work.
So again, I have 3 units in that fraud, waste, and abuse section. One of them, provider integrity, which we look at Medicaid provider fraud, waste, and abuse. We do that on the recipient side too for all programs coming out of the department. We also have a Medicaid provider enrollment unit, screening all those providers before they serve our members. But I envision it would take, again, depending on the definition of program, it would take a substantial amount of resources, of my time, our supervisor's time, again, taking away from that mission to define and to come up with what the programmatic goals would be. We already have goals, but to put it in this format, to report on it in this format would take, I would say, at least 80 hours of one person's time, which is about 2 weeks.
So we just wanted to highlight that because we did feel that the fiscal note that was available was pretty vague. So it's going to be, it could be extremely time intensive depending again upon how you define program and what the expectations outlined in the bill are. But to do it meaningfully per the intent of the bill, I think would be very, very resource intensive. We have hundreds of what we would define as HOPA programs. We have hundreds of programs across DHHS. And I would say we do not have the resources to do it as the bill is designed without the amendment. I mean, if we didn't utilize the amendment. The other thing I would just note is that the way the legislation is designed, we would produce the strategic plan and the performance evaluation for every program, but the commission would only look at 5 of them for each agency. So there would be a lot of work going into the creation of those to only then hone in on 5 individual subjects. So that's kind of just for consideration. And we do think that it would make sense to look at the commission membership to expand it a little bit so that it can include some agency representatives to coordinate and collaborate with business representatives, since government work is sort of its own language, and we would just be able to offer the subject matter expertise of what kind of recommendations would be workable. And we're happy to take questions.
Good. Are there any questions? I think we're feeling flooded. Representative Sitek.
Your card says that you are providing information. Isn't it in fact that you're supporting the amendment?
We do support the amendment. That's accurate. Yes.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that this would require you to do a great deal of work every budget season on every program as you define it, and most of that work would not be even looked at. Is that correct?
That's the way that the bill reads, as I read it. Yes, is that we would be producing a strategic plan and a program evaluation, I believe is how it's phrased, for every program within the department every 2 years. But the commission only selects 5 of those for their work.
Okay, well that seems inefficient.
John is going to correct me on something.
Not a correction. We have a wonderful with Ms. Deleuze with us doing our great work. But to answer Representative Sitek's question, we are here merely as a resource, as indicated on our pink card, to provide information to committee. Although we are supportive of the wonderful efforts that are made when a sponsor will meet with the department to discuss potentially a strategy to reduce the impact, it in no way should be connoted as us taking a supportive position of the bill as it came to you, nor as of the amendment. We're here as a resource. So thank you. I'm good.
Thank you, John.
Yes, well, thank you for your weasel words, Mr. Williams. Yeah, you think that HHS has hundreds of programs?
As we define it, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
could you rattle off 3 or 4 so we get an idea of the scope of them?
Oh, well, for example, in our recipient fraud unit, the Special Investigations Unit, we have a FRED program. So that's a front end detection program. That's just one piece of what they do. We also, in other programs, for example, my provider enrollment unit, which enrolls and screens all Medicaid providers, we have a program where we're revalidating all 30 to 40,000 Medicaid providers, and we have to do that every 5 years. So it's the process of managing that, and what is the process and procedure that goes into that? What are the numbers every month that we process through there? What are the errors? Just in terms of that, we meet with our contractor, Conduit, in Medicaid provider enrollment, and we monitor their work. So that would be another project of how are they enrolling providers? What sort of errors are we seeing, or what sort of numbers are we seeing?
I'll just note that within DHHS, my division is a tiny slice. I have about 100 staff members. Francesca is a tiny slice within that, who has 3 distinct units, and each of those units has maybe 1 or 2 major programs that they run.
I see. Thank you, Representative Dargy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You said it's roughly 1,000 different things that would qualify for this.
I think I said hundreds.
100? Okay. How many of them have this kind of a document, and how many would be required to have a new document that's not in existence already?
I think it depends on how program gets defined by the commission. The document that John has handed out to you, that's pre-made by the Department of Administrative Services. So that's a template that's filled out, and all the state agencies have to do that every 2 years as part of their agency budget. The way that and I think the way the amendment is written is that we could submit that in place of what's required in the original legislation. The way the bill was originally written was that we would create a strategic plan and a program evaluation for every program. And that's where I was saying, since we have hundreds of programs, that could be quite labor intensive.
Representative Sellers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's hundreds of program or 100 programs, I mean, if I was on the commission, how would I know which program? I have 100 to pick from, right? So if you don't provide the data for the 100, I wouldn't know which one I might want to look at.
Yep, that's absolutely a fair point. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Exactly. And I'm sure that that somebody more familiar with these forms would be able to say which of these programs need more examination. Anyone else? Representative Sejcek.
This isn't the HHS committee, but I just heard 30,000 Medicaid providers. What are they? Are they 30,000 doctors? What?
It's all forms of providers. Yep. So that does includes everything from a doctor to a hospital to a nursing home to a speech therapist, occupational therapist,
A school district.
the SAUs. Yep. Anyone who serves Medicaid beneficiaries would be enrolled as a provider, either as a group or an institution or an individual.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm wondering, this form that Mr. Williams handed to each one of us a few minutes ago is quite detailed and so forth. Is this something that DHHS has developed, or is this something that comes down from the feds or from another, like from DAS, for example? Because the question I think is kind of probably forming in all of our minds is this kind of like way more intensive look at anything than really needs? It's not it sounds like a make work type of concept in a way, but where does this thing come from? Is this something you guys developed, or?
No, that form is developed by DAS.
DAS.
And it's part of our budget process. So every 2 years in the agency phase of the budgets, all agencies complete that form, and it's posted online after
Follow
completion.
up. And this really works. I mean, it's not overwhelmingly like it's so much trouble that when we're done we go like, "Ooh, thank God that's over."
I'm sure that they fill it out in detail once and then just go through and update a lot.
It's updating every couple of years. The form was developed, I want to say, around 2015, 2016, originally when the RSA 9 the efficiency budgets were created and put into legislation. And yes, it's exactly right. Madam Chair, they are then updated every 2 years as we go in and redo our budgets.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I see this has got a lot of the backup data on what the program is and how much you spend on it. It doesn't have the goals or any of the output measures.
There are goals. It depends on the level and maybe the page that you're looking at, but the mission statement, goals, and performance metrics are included.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of for
Thank you. That's something we'd have to look
example,
at.
maybe on the like second or third page of the handout, you'll see goal number 3 for as an example, the number of staff that are included, the goals for that program, performance, an output and an outcome performance measure, a baseline, and then a target, and 26 and 27 goals.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. But it sounds like that if you define program at that level, you'd have a lot of data already.
That's right. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Depending on where you put that definition.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for your input.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jasper?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food. And before I begin my written testimony, unfortunately, I have to say a few things I wasn't planning on. So I did share my written testimony with the sponsor. And what's happened is now there's been a posting out there that says that I'm opposed to transparency and trying to kill the bill. Nothing could be further from the truth, and nothing in the testimony that I'm going to read, I don't think you can interpret that way. In the over 7 years that I have been commissioner, I have been committed to transparency. We had a fund which I referred to as our slush fund, and I hate that. And legislatively, we changed it so that it could only be used for specific purposes, where before we could really take anything we wanted out of that fund. I don't think that's proper in government. And included in there was all our travel. And it took me 2 budget cycles actually to get the legislature, and we're not through it yet. But at least to this point, the governor and the House have agreed to allow us to take our travel out of that slush fund and put it where everybody can see it. So that's just one example of my commitment to transparency. And I'm not opposed to this bill. I'm not taking a position on it directly, and I'll tell you why, because I don't think I understand it well enough to have a position. With that, I will start my written testimony, and I don't normally write things down. I normally testify off the cuff, but I thought that this was important enough that I should have my thoughts as organized as I could. And I have to admit that while I always thought I was a fairly intelligent person, this bill makes my head spin like no other piece of legislation has since my first election to the legislature in 1984. I really don't understand a fair amount of what it is looking to accomplish that isn't already done through the budget process. Moreover, for a regulatory agency like the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food, I don't understand how we could produce something that really had any value for those we serve. I am sure that the sponsors of the bill have a good understanding of what they are looking for, but at least when it comes to me, it doesn't translate well. I can tell you that we don't already do everything that the legislature has asked of us, and that we can't with the current staffing we have. But we do prioritize the important tasks and then do as much of the other items as possible. This bill would require the department to do less, even if my estimates prove to be wrong. Frankly, I think I've underestimated the time required to meet these goals. Someone would have to be tasked in each division with figuring out how we can meet the requirements of the bill, or someone would have to be tasked with doing that for the entire department. Either way, I would estimate that to build a program that accomplishes the requirements set out in the bill would take about 20 hours a week for several months. I would then estimate that to keep up with the reporting requirements, it would take about 10 hours a week moving forward. I have to ask, what would you have us do less of? More importantly, how do you see the findings being used? That's what I can't even begin to understand. We do inspections. Each inspection is different and takes a different amount of time based on the conditions we find. Last year, we found that expired grass seeds were being sold all over the state. It took most of the growing season to bring that problem under control. I issued nearly $250,000 worth of fines to get the guilty parties to take notice. We collected $100,000 of those fines after hearings and negotiations. That won't happen again this year because we've got them under control. So how would that look in a report? The amount of time we spend on seed will go down and the time we spend on something else will increase. On a report, it will look like we were inconsistent and lacked in our planning. It's easy to say that it'll all be in the report, but who will have time to dig into the details of hundreds of programs in state government? I would suggest that no one will. It will be the inconsistencies that jump out at a reader. The details will likely be in the report, but committee members may want to have a first-hand explanation. I probably would. More time eaten up. Frankly, I don't know what we'll find this year, if anything, but what we do will be based on inspections and cannot be planned out unless it is only to stick to a plan and meet the wants of the bill. That is not good government. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you answer some questions?
I certainly would be glad to.
Representative Sellers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I'm hearing you say is that this is definitely going to cost somebody in your agency more time on a weekly basis.
No doubt about that.
Representative Schmidt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome this afternoon. Commissioners, very good to see you as a longtime colleague in both chambers, so to speak. But I recall, I never read the book, but I heard about a journal that a particular individual kept. That was quite a thick book, and it not categorized, but it kept track of everything he did all day long. He kept track of everything, and you're going like, I mean, it took you longer to write the report, so to speak, than it did to do the activity. And I thought to myself, in God's name, not only who would do such a thing, but who the heck would read it? You know, I was in the Marine Corps many, many years ago, before any of you were born. The sergeant once said, there are three ways of doing things. The right way, the wrong way, and the Marine Corps way. We do things the Marine Corps way. So we went, okay, well, let's see how that works out. And this just strikes me as like the book the guy wrote about everything he did all day long, every year of his life. Except, I guess, the first couple of years he hadn't thought of it yet.
Your question, Representative Schmidt?
I think you can get the idea. The question I have, is this not more damn trouble than it's worth?
Well, I can only speak to my agency. And you know, we're already an agency that produces more revenue for the state than we expend. And so all I can say is that it is likely that we will produce less revenue for the state if we are required to do all these things. I have seen the amendment. I have not had the time to figure out if in the long term that really helps, but I think most of my questions would still remain. I just don't understand the benefit to the community that we serve, and those are the people who are directly really paying the bills, because even though, yes, we have a general fund appropriation, on our normal activities, excluding we have the cost of care fund, the FAIRS grant, the Ag Lands Preservation grant, when you take those out and you just look at our core mission, what we take from the general fund is less than what we give to the general fund. And so I'm very concerned about what purpose it will serve. I'm always in favor of government efficiency. I'm always in favor of, you know, transparency in spite of what's been posted. but I think this is counterproductive, at least to an agency like mine, and I can only speak to that.
Yes. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah, so you think that that your programs are the amount of work you spend on a particular program depends on the results of your working on them.
I know that to be true, because, as I say, we can't do everything you've already asked us to do. And so as time allows, and a couple of years ago or last year, we really had to stop doing the organic program, which was one of those things you either do all of it or you do nothing. We were spending over $250,000 to get $15,000 worth of revenue when there were 8 other private organizations that could do it. That freed up time. That's where we found out that people were being sold expired seed. People think, oh, well, I must have watered it too much, not watered it enough, or whatever. And in many cases, it was because we had become a dumping ground for seed that had expired or was about to. That took all summer of one regulatory division to straighten out. There are other things we need to look at that we're not doing, including sampling fertilizers to see if people are getting the content that they're being paid for in terms of, the various nitrogen and et cetera, that are going in there. We're only doing that right now on request. That is not what we should be doing. But we can only do what we have the staffing for.
Thank
And
you.
I don't have anybody sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So,
Representative Svitek?
I think I'm going to make explicit what you've delicately put, and that's that you will be writing reports or goals rather than actually doing enforcement. And that will take, because of the time lost, you've also indicated that fines will be lost, although that's maybe not our major concern, but enforcement will be suffer. Is that correct? Is that a correct summary of, or yeah, you put it delicately, but I think that's what you're saying.
I don't see how there could be a different outcome than that, Representative Sitek. Thank you for the question.
All right. Anyone else have a question? Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to testify on Senate Bill 193? All right. Seeing none, I will close the hearing and open the hearing on Senate Bill 201. And Mr. Bossy is 245. Oh, thought it was 2:30. Wrong again. We will be taking a short break. All right. Representative Groda has suggested that we retain this bill as it appears to be a very good idea with a shaky implementation. And so if we want to work on it. And yes, Representative. Okay, yes, Representative Sitek.
We tried to kill another bill because there was just too much work for our committee to do. And that's what I sense about this. There's been really no redeeming features that I've heard except from the sponsor. So I think ITL is the way to go, not retention.
Well, both Representative Leon and Representative Groda independently came up with the idea to retain it. So they're interested in working on it.
I'm not.
You're not, okay, we'll make sure you're not assigned to it.
Great, I'm glad they're happy.
So, you,
Yes,
Representative Grover.
yes, I'll make a motion to retain House Bill Senate Bill 193.
I'll second.
Okay. Representative Brody, do you wish to speak on it?
Yes, thank you. So, in reading the requirements of the bill, I have to say that it's a lot of work, and but it's something that we could take a look at, and maybe in working on it, we find out that it isn't workable. But at least, I think that it's we should take a stab at either paring it down or identifying, making it more specific as to what we would want this commission to do. So based on that, I thought that would be the best option for the bill.
Representative Lamb?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think there are some good ideas in here to make sure that what we're doing is focused. I would say that going after expired seeds is an important thing and going and cycling through, but the bill as we have it in front of us isn't going to achieve those goals at this point. So I believe in retaining this and seeing what we can do in order to make sure that we're ensuring the best, most efficient government going forward. And we understand which of our priorities aren't being funded, because when we're writing laws and we don't know what's being actually happening, that's not really the most beneficial part of our job as legislators.
I'd like to say that it reads like a homework assignment from my MBA courses. And I think it's a little too broad. It would make more sense to me if the commission said, well, we need information on this program in HHS and this program in DOT, and asked for the report rather than having every agency generate a report on every program. And then the commission picking up the ones they wanted. But that's just one idea. There may be, it does appear to be very confusing and labor intensive, so I'll support retain. Anyone, Representative Svitek? You're not supporting it, okay.
There was another troubling aspect, which somebody who was not testifying for or against, just information made. And what's the output going to do? Where does this go? So here's the reports. Okay, now what?
Yes, that's a good point. Anyone else? Comments?
On the shelf with all the other reports that have been generated, that and somebody's going to have to write a report on what's being done with all those reports.
Representative Schmidt, don't you know that's the purpose of the state library?
I go over there, but not for that.
Anyway, so anyone else have a comment? Representative Slattery?
Yeah, just comment on maybe a thought. Why do you need a fire tower, right? Sometime, most of the time there's not a fire, but if the information is made available to the public, it might be easier to spot some smoke as a reason to consider it.
Okay. Thank you. And if they can't figure out how much it costs to implement Title I, that's rather troubling. Okay. Anyone else? Comments? Okay. The motion is to retain Senate Bill 193, and the clerk can call the roll.
Representative, Vice Chair Leon.
Yes.
The clerk votes no. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Bailey.
Aye.
Representative Sheehan.
Yes.
Representative Sellers.
Yes.
Representative Slattery.
Yes.
Representative Groda.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
No.
Representative Davis.
Yes.
Representative Dargy.
Yes.
Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative Long.
Reluctant, yes.
Was slow writing the X. And Representative, the Chair.
Yes.
Well, 14, 12, 2. Sound right? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. 12, 2.
All
To
right.
retain.
We
Move
will,
consent.
We don't have to write a report or issue it until, for another 6 months at least. We just retain it. All right. We have 5 minutes. Okay, yes. And Representative Leon moves ought to pass on House Bill 190, Senate Bill 196 with Amendment 1568, which is on its way around to you.
Don't we want to do the amendment first?
The first action is to vote on the amendment, yes. All right, first, is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Thank you.
And it's 1568. So would you care to speak on the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is the language that Senator Waters brought us. What this does is it removes the contingency around funding the two positions that initially, when this was drafted, they thought would be needed within the Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services. However, testimony from the Deputy Adjutant General told us that we did not need that, and that's also reflected in the fiscal note. So this essentially removes lines 12 through 16 and line 18 by simply replacing that section 2 and section 3 with an effective date 60 days after passage.
Representative Grota?
I have nothing else to say. Thank you.
Anyone else? Comments, questions, concerns? All right. The motion is to adopt Amendment 1568 to Senate Bill 196, and the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chair Leon,
Yes.
clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Bailey.
Aye.
Representative Sheen.
Yes.
Representative Sellers.
Yes.
Representative Slatchy.
Yes.
Representative Grota.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
Yes.
Representative Davis.
Yes.
Representative Dargy.
Yes.
Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative Long.
Yes.
The chair.
Yes.
14-0.
Okay,
14-0.
we have adopted the amendment, and the motion is ought to pass with amendment by Representative Leon.
And who seconds?
Yes. Any discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that this makes sense when they have in-house architects, and what used to be a $500,000 project is now $1 million project. I think it makes sense to do this internally as opposed to needing to bid it out.
Okay. Representative Grota?
Thank you, Madam Chair, but I yield.
Anyone else? Comments, concerns? Okay, in that case, the motion is ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 196, and the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon,
Yes.
clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Bailey.
Aye.
Representative Sheehan.
Yes.
Representative Sellers.
Yes.
Representative Slatchy.
Yes.
Representative Grota.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
Yes.
Representative Davis.
Yes.
Representative Dargy.
Yes.
Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative Long.
Yes.
And the chair.
Yes.
Looks like 14-0.
Any objections to consent? All right, seeing none, we'll put that one on consent. And we have a minute. Next week, we are not having a session, so I've scheduled Wednesday afternoon and all day Thursday to get through a large number of our Senate bills. So I hope you will able to be here. And
What time are we starting on Thursday?
10?
Wednesday and Thursday.
On Wednesday, we're starting at 1 or 1:15.
Okay.
1:15.
On Thursday, we're starting at 10 a.m.
Okay. As it will say in the calendar, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Madam Chair, when did that notice come out as
What's
far
that?
as for Thursday? No notice has been given as far as meeting on
Oh,
Thursday?
the speaker told the chair's meeting that we will not be having session next Thursday, the 17th.
Correct.
Right, so we will be having a day of hearings.
Okay, so we haven't been notified as a, except for right now.
Well, he did say it was probably not going to happen, and to be honest, I don't think there's, yeah, officially, no, you had not been notified. All right, and it's, I'm sure that by the time the calendar comes out with the scheduling, you will know, they will have a notice that there's no session. Okay. It being 1:45 or 2:45. I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 201, and I call Grant Bossy.
Good afternoon again, Chairwoman McGuire and members of the committee. I remain Grant Bossy, Deputy Chief of Staff for the New Hampshire Senate, here now pinch hitting for Senator Dan Innes, the prime sponsor of Senate Bill 201. As amended by the Senate, Senate Bill 201 does two things. It empowers the Division of Personnel to convert certain unclassified positions to classified exempt positions. These conversions would be voluntary. It also empowers agencies to request that DOP convert unclassified positions that serve at the pleasure of that appointing agency to a classified exempt position. I would defer questions to the DAS personnel here today. And Senator Innes thanks you for consideration and support of Senate Bill 201. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Arlinghouse?
I have Matt sit with me.
Sure. Have him introduce himself, please, because I can't figure out his name.
So I'm Charlie Arlinghouse. I'm the Commissioner of Administrative Services, and this is
Matt Mavergeorge, Deputy Director of Personnel. Happy to be here. Thank you.
It's easier to pronounce than it looks like. That's what I keep telling myself. We'll try.
Excuse me?
Why don't we spell Maggiore?
It's
Oh, I'm sorry. Terrific. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. As Mr. Bossy said, it's a very simple bill that does very little. This is the easiest, simplest thing you'll have to do this year.
Sure.
One hopes. We want to create salaried positions in the system. People probably know this, that classified employees in state government, which is 96% of employees, are essentially paid hourly. And we would create a class of salaried positions. They would still be subject to the union. They would still be subject to everything else, but we would accomplish this through voluntary conversion so that some people, it's a little weird. So I think some people would say that you have like an accountant making $100,000 a year who's paid hourly, and at 4:02, they have to punch the clock. This would create the possibility for those positions, but it would be voluntary, and there's rules for that. Currently, the commissioner is assigned rulemaking authority on unclassified positions, which has proven complex. And this would just add to that list of rules, unpaid leave, unpaid medical leave, and discipline, which are problems that come up periodically where there are no rules surrounding those things. And we just say
You
that
have no rules on discipline?
we have no rules on discipline of unclassified employees. It's a very small group of people. And I think it dates back to when there were like 30 of them, and people are like, the governor will just fire them. But now there's almost 450, so it's very different than it was. The third thing is a housekeeping change for risk and benefits. There in some amendment 2 years ago, a provision on healthcare premiums was accidentally deleted. We still have to offer them, we still have to charge them, but it was accidentally deleted from the law. We didn't do anything precipitously. We just said next time we have a bill, we'll add that back in because it's supposed to be there. And it was literally somebody was key punched the wrong thing. And then the fourth thing is just some other issue. When we create new unclassified positions, there is often an enormous lag time because the position is created. Then there's a whole process that we go through to establish the labor grade through the JCEC process, and it takes a very long time. This would just allow us to establish a temporary labor grade so that if you created, let's just say for the sake of argument, a deputy commissioner of agriculture, He could start when you created it, not a year later. And if I'm honest, the position that everybody kind of thinks it's going to be, the labor grade, is 98% of the time what it ends up as. So this is very, very housekeeping. But if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question. If you create, say, a deputy commissioner of agriculture at labor grade GG, for example, and JCEC comes back and says, well, no, that's the wrong level. What do you give him back pay? Or do you say, well, we overpaid you for the last year?
No, we would just do it on a going forward basis. And so basically it would be, in the past, this sometimes happened in legislation where they would say, the new Commissioner of Business and Economic Affairs, for example, in 2017 was created at a labor grade. And then it said, and go through the process to evaluate it. And this, occasionally that happens, occasionally it doesn't.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Representative Schmidt?
As a member of the JCEC, I would like to point out that the agency suggests a labor grade, but we don't do that. That goes off to our hired guns in San Francisco to either agree with the labor grade or they give us their recommendation, and usually it's the salary that there's some debate about. I can't recall we ever rejected what our consultant tells us the labor grade should be. And since the commissioner's already said 98% of the time it ends up being what you guesstimate it to be at the beginning, so low order of probability of that being a different outcome than it already is. So that's not a
And that
question.
committee always does whatever Representative Schmidt tells them to.
Well, of course, doesn't everybody?
Yes.
Any other representative, do you have a comment?
Just as a comment, historical note, I believe that at least once, Corn Ferry Hay has come back less than the department suggested. That hasn't happened just once or twice tops.
Well, you're the clerk, so you would remember best.
Representative Sellers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm understanding that you're going to maybe move people to salary versus hourly. What is this going to cost us?
It wouldn't cost anything. In fact, there's the reason there's no fiscal note attached to the bill is that, how do I put this? There are a lot of people. So as you may know, we're implementing a new timekeeping system called WFM, which connects with our enterprise system run by Infor, commonly known as New Hampshire First. And in that, people are clocking in now. And somebody said in the past, I'm not an hourly employee, I'm salaried. And on their time card, they just would, on every Friday, would go 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. And we now clock in and out. And I said, you're not salaried, you're hourly. And they said, really? I didn't know that. And so what would happen is that you would essentially say the 37.5 times your hourly rate, which is what you think you would make. You would just make it as salaried, not hourly. So there would be no cost to it. To do a cost version of it, we would have to almost certainly undergo some bargaining and change appropriations.
Follow.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So there's no benefit changes, no anything changes, just changing hourly to salary.
That's all we would do.
And would that be for every employee?
No, it wouldn't. In fact, the way this is envisioned, right? So we don't have this today, and the question is, how can you get there with a group of what are called under FLSA exempt positions, and how could you get there? And I think the only way to get there is voluntarily. I mean, realistically, you could, and some companies have in the past forced it. I don't think that's the way the state's going to go or will ever go. And so you would have to say to people, and there are a lot of people like this who somebody said to me in the timekeeping discussions, it really aggrieves them to keep track of their time. And we said, yeah, but under the federal laws, you're hourly, you have to. And they said, can I just not be hourly anymore and not change my rate? And I said, not legally, but we're working on that.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you're saying that someone that changes to hourly then does not have to track the time by day or week at that point. So therefore, if they were out sick or out, you're not tracking that time any longer either?
There would still be a tracking mechanism for how you track your time, because how you accrue leave benefits, sick time benefits, and how you track them would still have to be tracked. There would probably be no longer a need to, when you immediately sit at your desk in the morning, sit down at your computer and punch a bunch of keys and clock in. So the clocking element of it, in terms of did you get here 7:58 or 8:03, would not be there anymore, although your supervisor is going to, notice. But you would still track leave and time off and all that. There's a general requirement to track time off.
Okay. Representative Seitek?
I don't know if it's appropriate, Madam Chair. You keep referring, it's still tracked, but not 7:58, not 8:03. How is it tracked?
I can answer that. I worked as an exempt person in several large organizations where I had to keep track of what days I was in and which programs to charge. And so I would write on my time card, worked, and that would count for 1 week or something like that. Or I would write on Monday, out sick or whatever. There's a number of ways you can do it.
There are a lot of ways to do it. The state, for example, years ago, before we had any sophisticated timekeeping systems, I think before we went to Infor/Lawson, I talked to people who were here in like the 90s and the early 2000s, my deputy commissioner, for example, and it was exception pay where you would put in when you were out. You would essentially be presumed in and you would put in when you were out. And so the default in the computer system was essentially you're going to get paid. And what HR and your supervisor are doing are tracking when you're not here. But there are 85 different ways to do it. And we would do whatever one was simplest for both the employee and our computer.
Okay. I'm sure you can figure that out.
I would hope.
Representative Broder?
So as written, this bill applies only to your agency, correct?
No, this would apply to the whole state, but
Okay.
but it would be a voluntary thing. So people in insurance or, well, anywhere. For exempt positions, right? And which is a term in FLSA.
Follow-ups. A
Follow-up,
follow-up.
please.
So what you're saying is, because I was an exempt employee my whole career as well, right? And I would not clock in, but in the computer system, I would say when I was taking vacation, so that they would know that I hadn't taken too many days of my vacation. So those individuals that are exempt, there are those that that throughout the state still need to. Okay, so this just takes care of that group of
It
individuals.
only takes care of that. I mean, the way it works right now is 98% of our employees ish,
Yeah.
all but 400 are tracked hourly. And as we implement a new timekeeping system, that becomes an issue for some of them. In addition to that, I mean, and I don't want to go too deep down a rabbit hole, but the state had an audit. We had the Littler Company perform on us at the insistence of the federal DOL in lieu of fining us $20 million in 2015. And one of the things they discovered was that the way the state tracked a lot of things was not strictly speaking conforming with what you would refer to as the law. And so the state has been working in that time period at improving our compliance with all the legal ramifications. And you probably know that FLSA is just thousands of pages, not thousands, but I think it's 800 pages. It's a complicated document. And we were doing things where people worked overtime, like would work at a liquor store on the weekend and not counted as overtime. And they would say, well, technically you're one employer, you're one tax ID number, right? So you're one company, you're not 84. And so you got to pay that guy overtime. And so we've been improving dramatically, but the new timekeeping system will do a lot with that. But this is just another way. It's silly to pretend that certain employees are hourly when they just aren't.
Exactly. Anyone else? Representative Saitek.
Couple things that actually happened to me in my misspent early career. I had somebody working in two shops, but there was one employer. We tried to weasel around it and couldn't. But I want to make a comment, and that's my feelings are a little hurt. This shouldn't this have been a House bill? This is typically the kind of thing we see, not the Senate. But that's just a comment.
I believe it's a Senate bill because their deadline was later and we didn't get around to it in time. But next time, I'll come to you first.
I feel much better.
Thank you.
We appreciate the honesty, Commissioner. Any other questions? Representative Bailey?
Thank you. I don't know if it applies in this context, but I've sometimes heard in the past the difference between exempt and non-exempt had to do with whether you were paid overtime or not.
In the state system currently, both exempt and non-exempt get what lay people would refer to as overtime, and that means me, lay people, and unclassified employees do not. If you're an exempt employee, and it tends to do with your responsibilities, and as a proxy, there's a wage rate, so higher paid workers currently would receive straight time overtime. There are exceptions in that for things like IT workers who routinely earn straight time overtime and things like that. But it is typically the distinction. But we have a lot of employees in the state who don't earn overtime ever, and where this just is not an issue for them. I mean, my hunch is, and it's one of the reasons it needs to be voluntary. My hunch is anyone who earns significant overtime right now has no interest in not being hourly because it works for them, and that's something we would be honoring. But there are just tons of employees who are like, look, I'm a lawyer. I don't want to be hyper concerned about whether it's 4:15 or 4:25 in the afternoon today, and it feels weird to me, and it should feel weird to them, and I get that. And under this scenario, they could, if they wished, they could be in that situation. We can't abuse them, but they could be in that situation where they're just salaried. I will say this, I have not kept a time card since work study in college in the music listening library at William and Mary. And literally not since then. That and caddying are the only times I ever had to keep track of my time. And even then, it was per round, not per hour.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Pearson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, okay. You said voluntary. I have 4 people that work wherever. They do the same job. You got 4 of them. All 4 in, all 4 out, 2 in, 2 out, 3 in 1. How does that work?
Well, it's a good question. And the way it would work, and we haven't implemented because we have no statutory authority to, it would be optional. I think
That you didn't answer my question. Optional as a whole, optional as a part.
individual.
Individual. All right,
I think
follow up.
I think the only way to implement this as a state government,
Okay.
and my interest is getting to the point where we have some people who can be salaried employees who want to be, and so creating that mechanism. I think the only way you can create that mechanism without doing a very complicated bargaining effort, with 85 different machinations involved in it, is to say it's a choice. It's an option. You know what? If you're more comfortable keeping a time card and tracking it precisely and all of that, that's fine. We can do that. That's the way we do it now. We can keep doing that. If you said to me, oh, for God's sake, can I just be a salaried employee and keep track of it that way? Your option too. But because we're giving the employee the option, it becomes fair because it's your choice, not my choice. I'm not imposing it upon you. The extent when the employer decides to impose on it, by the way, we could do that, right? The state could decide as a matter of bargaining that we want to bargain a position where these 1,463 positions, let's just say, are now salaried. and we're going to pay them this way, and those are the rules. We could do that. It would be a huge bargaining effort. And the idea behind this was to say, look, there are a lot of people who really want this, and it's not a big deal either way. It doesn't. There's no cost to the state. It's a matter of choice for them. It's not like we're going to get less work out of them, or I mean, arguably, you're more likely to get more work out of them. They're probably not going to err on the side of leaving when the bell rings. And if that's what they're more comfortable doing, it works for everybody, and it's without turmoil.
Follow up.
Okay, so let me throw you one other clarity question, right? So I become the minister of silly walks for the state of New Hampshire. I decide that I want to go salary, but I eventually leave employment. Does that position now stay as a salary position, or is the next person that fills my role then get that choice again?
I think it would probably be, leaving aside that the minister of silly walks is probably an unclassified employee, and so they are salaried. But let's just say the deputy minister.
Sure.
I think what I would envision is that, because we would also be in a state where if you have a vacant position, you could transfer that. Then I think that becomes the choice of the appointing authority, the commissioner, the head of the agency. So with a vacant position, I would make that not the employee choice, but you hire, so that when you're hired, you know the rule coming into what you're hired.
Okay, like, Representative Dargy, you had a question? No? Okay, anyone else?
Okay, if you need anything, I'm across the street.
Still? Where did you?
It's very loud, but they're grinding the floor above my office, literally. And you have no idea, but it cuts down on unnecessary conversation.
In that case, wait a second. Are you sure there's no more questions? All right, thank you, Commissioner.
I was in your office today, your former office, Charlie, and somebody could make a lot of money out of all that copper in your ceiling.
I think
Above where your ceiling.
one of my former offices has a sign on the door that says "Danger, do not enter." So I'm hoping it's not that one.
The one right there by the door, next to Dawn's office.
Okay.
More straightforward than I thought. More straightforward.
All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on Senate Bill 201? That scared them out. All right, I'm going to close the hearing. Anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to auto pass.
Representative Sellers.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You'll second it, I presume.
I would never interfere with Representative
Representative
Sellers.
Sellers, I don't think you've made any motions yet.
I
so
know,
think
that's
it's
why I
your turn.
hesitated and I stopped.
It's your, in that case, what's your motion, Representative?
I motion to ought to pass on Senate Bill 201 FN.
All right, and Representative Brodick seconds. So, do you wish to speak on your motion?
I think we heard during the hearing that there's no cost to the state. It's going to be voluntary for those that are already employed, and up to the commissioners, I guess, for the new employees that come aboard.
Okay, Representative Broda?
Representative Sellers did that exceptionally well, and I have nothing to add.
All right. Anyone else have a comment, concern? Representative Pearson?
Just that we have another Senate bill with a fiscal note that doesn't really have a fiscal note. That, like, they're throwing FNs on everything.
I believe that may be due to the fact that it was, they thought it might cost, and then they looked at it and said it doesn't. The fiscal note explicitly said there's no fiscal impact.
Right. Okay, so that FN can be stripped.
Yes.
We don't have the power to do that, do we?
No, we don't. It's one of those things that we can't take it off. It's like you're the sponsor of a bill that gets gutted and totally replaced. You're still the sponsor forever. Anyone else have a comment relative to the bill? Representative Saitek.
If it goes to, we don't put those, we can put that on consent calendar despite the fact that it has technically an FN on it.
The FN does not keep it off consent as long as the money is it says something like it's less than $10,000 or to no effect. Well, for heaven's sakes, we put the, we had a bill that on, more than a year of workers' comp time toward your pension that had a multi-million-dollar fiscal note, and we put that on consent because we didn't believe the fiscal note. And nobody else caught it either, so. All right, any other?
Just making sure.
That's right, no, it's no problem. Anyone else? Representative Bailey?
They said no, but I am sort of puzzled at this. It makes no difference whether you're exempt or non-exempt. That's a federal classification, is it, or?
Yes.
And we just,
However,
we don't care, and we don't, you know.
if I understand it correctly, the description of the job says that you can be exempt, or you're exempt by the job, whether you're supervising somebody, whether you're high paid, whether you work independently, and how you're paid. You can still be paid hourly in an exempt position.
Well, he did mention that some people were getting overtime pay and would not like to go on this. And so I'm going to assume then if you lost your mind, you were getting a lot of overtime and lost your mind and chose to go this way, you would cease getting overtime?
You would not be getting overtime at time and a half or double time for Sunday or whatever the negotiated agreement is. But you would still get the same
But if enough
pay and benefits.
if enough people chose differently, wouldn't that have a fiscal impact?
Eventually. Probably would go down.
No, just in terms of the kind of meaningless fiscal note, it seems like buried down in this, there's some sort of fiscal impact.
Yeah, it's a second or third level effect because they explicitly say that the pay is the same and the benefits aren't different other than the, overtime. And so it's only if people change their behavior would make a difference.
Once one goes from, what is it, non-exempt hourly to exempt, can one ever go back?
Change jobs.
It seems to be a one-way path.
I think it's a one-way path, yeah.
Yeah. Huh?
Mhm.
Interesting.
Representative Leon?
Thank you. I figure if somebody doesn't want to keep track of those hours and doesn't want to be able to collect the overtime, hopefully they're not, and they are getting overtime. Hopefully their job doesn't include any math. But if that's the case, I think that hopefully the people who are working for the state are able to make sure that they're watching out for their best interests and how they're classified.
Yeah, you got to trust people to know what's good for them. Anyone else? Okay, in that case, the motion is ought to pass by Representative Sellers, and the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Bailey.
Aye.
Representative Sheehan.
Yes.
Representative Sellers.
Yes.
Representative Slutchy.
Yes.
Representative Grote.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Only room for one, Glenn. Representative Davis.
Yes.
Representative Dargy.
Yes.
Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative Long.
Yes.
And the chair.
Yes.
14-0.
Does anyone object to consent now that we've gotten the fiscal note out of the way? Not seeing any. We'll put this on consent. All right. Thank you all. We have heard and disposed of 4 Senate bills. Representative Sellers, a committee report at your earliest convenience. And Representative Leon the same.
I've emailed those to you.
I will see you all tomorrow. It looks like it's going to be a delightful afternoon listening to the floor amendments on the budget. Oh, and just to remind people that at 3:30 or when we're done, the auto dealers will be buying us drinks. So consider that in deciding how long to talk. The Auto Dealers Association.
Tomorrow.
That's tomorrow.
Drinks, huh?
And, well, snacks too, but
Well, yeah. Just
I figured once in my little career, I've got to get a Monty Python reference in there somehow.
I,
we caught it, yes, yes.
yes.
You needn't demonstrate.
We disposed of